And good morning, everybody. For the applause, wait for the end. I was seeing somebody already starting. OK, so the quite ungrateful task to transition you to the lunch, talking about legal matters, which are sometimes, by definition, not so entertaining. But I'll try to do, of course, my best. As it was mentioned in the presentation, I'm both a business lawyer and a professor at the university, so I'll try to inject as much as practical angle as possible in my presentation, which is about blockchain, but you will see towards the end, I want to share with you a message that will be applicable to new technologies in general, also very much focused on artificial intelligence as well. Well, when a lawyer approaches a new technology, the big questions are what benefit this technology may actually bring to the society, to the economy, which could be the implication, actually, and how it will be regulated. So these are the fundamental questions that I have recently addressed in this paper regarding blockchain and IP, ICT contract, and data protection, which are my topic of expertise. Let's start immediately by smart contracts. A lot of people talk about smart contracts, but maybe they don't actually understand what it is exactly. Well, smart contract is something that we probably experience every day. You know, when you surf on the internet and you see different advertising messages on the banners, behind that there is the industry of programmatic advertising, buying and selling advertising spots and content. And this is not done by human beings. This is done by robots, by bots, that in a milliseconds are allocating that spot for a price. And that is a smart contract. It is a code inside a program, an algorithm, allocating that spot for a certain amount of price. OK? So everything happens seamless. We don't see that, but we experience it every day. Well, think about embedding a smart contract into a blockchain, and immediately you understand that that contract is going to perform immediately, execute something that is legally binding between persons. What is interesting is that if you embed a smart contract in a blockchain, that contract will be unmodifiable. So the rules that you set in the very formation of the agreement will stay and self-execute into the blockchain, which is very great for certainty, which is very great for immodifiability, which is very great in terms of speed of execution. But what about the classical flexibility that you want to have between two parties? You know, when you negotiate a contract, sometimes you negotiate it, but you also leave room for discretion. During the performance of the contract, you want to adjust it. But smart contracts in the blockchain cannot really be modified anymore unless you change the block. But you know that if you change the block, you have a problem with the whole construction of blockchain. So when we look at the performance of the contract, you know that when you create that algorithm that will execute commands that will actually bind two or more parties, that sequence should be right. Because after that, you will not be able to modify it. Good and bad of using smart contracts in a blockchain. Better result, better speed, less flexibility. Less flexibility also in terms of breach. Sometimes, you know, when you are enforcing a contract, one party may say, well, I will close an eyes, I will make an exception. Okay? I will use a little bit of leeway, a little bit of flexibility to keep our relationship, to keep our good business partnership. But in smart contracts, when they are granted as immodifiable in a blockchain, this is not possible. Unless you add attributions modifying that block, which may bring other problems as well. So when we look at the first item that we are discussing, for sure, blockchain may be very meaningful for smart contracts. They can be embedded in the blockchain and therefore used, replicated, but in my opinion, most of the time just to regulate a fairly simple relationship between businesses. For example, as we're going to see in a minute, if you pay me such money, I will give you something. Like, if you pay that money, I will release you the license to hear, to listen a song. And then we transition into the concept of intellectual property, smart contracts, and IP in the blockchain. So, you know, for example, that typical IP rights are copyright, trademarks, designs, and trade secrets. Copyright, you write a book, you write a paper, you write a song. As long as it is original, your moral rights are upon you directly, without doing anything. You don't need to register to any sort of registry. The economical right to exploit, they are also on you, unless you have released them. So somebody pay you to write a book or a song in exchange of money and in exchange of the license to be used to exploit, you know, that intellectual property. But the point with copyright is that you don't need to pre-register it in order to be protected. Whereas for trademarks, which is like how you protect a logo of your company, a brand of your company, for example, this needs to be registered. Whereas when you look at design, design is also very important. For example, in the product industry, in the fashion industry, you know, the design of the product, the shapes, the couture, that is also protected. And you typically don't need to register it in order to have that protection. And last but not least, the most complex, the trade secret. Anything that is not disclosed before, that have an economical value, and that you will substantially protect in order to prevent the access by other people, will be recognized as a trade secret. So if this is the introduction about a very simple macro categorization of IP rights, let's say how blockchain can play a role that can go beyond the legal role, a role that can change how the society is actually behaving around those IP rights. For example, when we look at blockchain and intellectual property on copyright, we know that you don't need to register copyright. But that is a pro and a con at the same time, because if you don't have a registry, sometimes it's difficult to understand whether that material has been copyrighted or not, has been produced by somebody else before. Think about having that proof in the blockchain, saying at that specific point in time, I have created that, and you embed that into a code, an unmodifiable code, which can be, of course, reached out by other party in order to confirm or not whether that material is copyrighted or not. That will be very interesting, actually. But we are changing the whole mechanism because we are disintermediating somebody, especially when we talk not just about copyright, but trademarks, where you need to register something in a sort of registry. So with this, in the copyright, it will be possible from the copyright owner, so that the creator of the song, of the book, and so on and so forth, to manage directly the licenses of that and be able to bank more money for what they are producing with more certainty. For example, you are creating something, a song, then you can put that into an algorithm, into the blockchain, encrypting it, and then releasing the song just against the payment of some money. And that will be a direct business model to valorize your intellectual property. When we think about trademark, the situation is slightly different because basically you want to see whether your brand has been exploited by somebody else. You want to protect counterfeiting. You want to be sure that the business around you is not taking advantage of what you have used before. But how do you manage to provide evidence of that usage before others. Of course, you can record it, you can register your trademark into a registry, as we do in Europe. But sometimes you want to do it in a quicker way, and that quicker way could be, once again, to upload on a blockchain the fact that you have used that specific mark, that trademark, at some point in time, and that is yours. So once again, we start to see how blockchain can be used as a sort of third-party repository that, because it is unmodifiable and because you can create rules, smart contracts, you can actually make sure that the things that you create or the things that you have decided to be representing your business can actually be used in a lawful way, having probably less cost than registration on a registry. That sometimes also happen by means of having consultants, IP lawyers, attorneys, and so on and so forth. When we look at design, as we said, is similar to copyright and does not need to be registered. So the things that we said on copyright and this direct interaction that you have between the IP owner and the possible exploiters will also hold for design. But there is something more. Blockchain can also be used by, for example, preventing that some products will be on the market in an unlawful way. For example, they don't have the right origin. They are exploiting brands that they shouldn't. By simply having scan tag that can be connected directly with the information in the blockchain and be verified simultaneously, which is also very interesting to prevent counterfeiting or any sort of breach of IP rights or even customs rights on the market. When we look then at trade secrets, one of the difficult things of trade secrets is the fact that you have that information at some point in time before the others, that information is about as an economical value, and then it is reasonably protected. So taking away the second part, having an economical value, which does not have anything to do with the blockchain could serve to say, at that specific point in time, I had that information. Then you need to prove, nevertheless, that that is for information as an economical value. But then blockchain is very interesting about reasonable measures taken to protect that information, which is a trade secret for you. Because if you choose a robust blockchain mechanism, even, for example, a private blockchain, you can actually substantiate that you have done something in terms of security and protection of that information, helping you, therefore, to prove the creation of that information and to prove the reasonable steps to have secure that information against public access or unlawful access by others. So when we look at blockchain and intellectual property, we are looking at something that can be really disruptive. Disintermediating third parties, having a direct relationship between the IP owner and the possible exploiters of those IP rights. A singer producing a song, not even being necessary to be represented by a label, but directly interacting with individuals, also preserving legal certainty, which is sometimes something difficult if you don't have a label or lawyers around you. But blockchain can enable that. And then we have seen it in the fight against counterfeiting and protection of your brands and so on and so forth. So let's move now to the last topic, personal data, and then we draw some more general conclusions. Possibly, if you want, also triggering a debate with questions at the end. So, you are all familiar with the data protection regulation, the GDPR, and you know all the fuss around it and the difficulties in implementing and complying with it. And definitely this proved right when we have to deal with new technologies like blockchain, but also artificial intelligence, that was exactly the presentation of before, and so on and so forth. We all start from the concept that personal data is defined in a very broad way. Personal data is any information directly or indirectly related to an individual. Even an IP address is a personal data. Okay, that was established by the Court of Justice of the European Union a few years ago. So when you think about that, and you think about the personal data that could be inside a blockchain, you may think about metadata. Metadata are actually data related to the entity or the subject that has uploaded information on the blockchain. Usually, metadata can be the public key, but if the public key is coupled with the IP address of the one who has done the upload, then this may also become a personal data, which is not something very obvious if you think about a public key and the relationship with an individual. But this could be like that. For sure, when we look at payload data, so the so-called transactional data, then you definitely can have personal data in it, like the name, the surname of people. Think about the use of blockchain in the healthcare sector. You may even have the so-called sensitive data, special categories of personal data, according to Article 9 of the GDPR. So then we need to think about blockchain and its model as a model that also needs to take into consideration privacy and data protection. And therefore, we need to do some reflection about that, how the main principles apply to blockchain. Well, the first main principle is the principle of lawfulness. So you need to process personal data based on a legal basis. Okay? Can be consent, performance of a contract, legal obligation, and so on and so forth. But in my paper, what I try to explain is that this does not have to do a lot with blockchain. Blockchain is simply a means. It's not a scope. It's not a finality. It's not that the scope of the data processing is to use blockchain technology. The scope of data processing is to provide healthcare services, is to provide the service, and you use blockchain in order to release the license, you know, for a contract, for a song, for a book, for whatever. So actually, the principle of lawfulness is not directly related with the blockchain, which is a means, but it's related with the scope that you want to achieve in conducting business or providing services to citizens, and the blockchain is just a means. So to me, the principle of lawfulness is neutral with respect to the blockchain. Transparency. Transparency is about informing individuals. Informing individuals can be done in a blockchain. Probably it is easier to do it in a closed private blockchain than in a public blockchain. Why that? Because one of the main elements of transparency, Article 13 or even 14 of the GDPR, is about sharing the recipients of the data. But potentially recipients of the data are all the nodes in the blockchain, which especially in a public blockchain cannot be limited in number, because it's just an incremental number. So immediately, if I want to fulfill Article 13, I fall short because I cannot define exactly all the recipients in a blockchain. Not to think about storage, because you also need to indicate in Article 13 information also for how long the information will be retained. And most likely in the blockchain, they are retained almost forever. Unless you start to think about different solutions. And I inject something that can provide at least partially a solution when you talk about privacy in blockchain. So you can have data on-chain or data off-chain. So you can also say, on-chain, I don't have personal data. I don't record personal data. I just put it off-chain, outside, and have the so-called pointers, hash pointers, saying that that block refers to personal data, but the personal data are not in the chain, are outside the chain. And because they are outside the chain, I can still work with them. I can still update them. I can even delete them at some point in time without going against the typical mechanism of the block that is unmodifiable. Okay? Think about purpose limitation. Once again, the principle is if I collect data for some purpose, I need to use it for a purpose that is coherent to that. But sometimes data are collected, stored in the blockchain, and used by third parties. You know, business, they want to use the blockchain and the data in it. So I always need to ask myself, as business using the blockchain and the data that are in it, whether my purposes are compatible with the purposes for which the data have been collected. And the way to do that maybe is about leveraging something similar to smart contracts. I want to have information inside the block telling me which kind of finality I can pursue. Because if the data have been collected for one scope and I want to use it for another one, maybe I simply cannot use that data and therefore that block and therefore that technology related to that block. Data minimization. This is one of the main points that was also mentioned recently by the European Parliament. It seems that blockchain goes directly against the principle of using the less amount of data in order to achieve the purposes. Why? Because you replicate, you know? So by multiplying the same block, then you are multiplying the personal data that you are using. And therefore, it may be seen as against the principle of data minimization. Unless, once again, you think about not storing the data inside the block, but putting that outside the block and having the pointers. Then we look at accuracy. Accuracy is also the principle where data always need to be updated, up to date, and accurate. Let's say that you have uploaded the wrong personal data. According to the GDPR, a data subject should be able to have those data be modified. But modification is against the old concept of blockchain. And therefore, possible solution that have been proposed is to add an additional block saying, well, this is a rectification. Those data are not accurate. This block is going to tell you the accurate amount of data. But this will result, once again, in a proliferation of data, not just the one in the block, some data more than that, possibly conflicting with the principle of data minimization. Storage limitation, we have already discussed about that, because potentially, or not potentially, according to the law, data should be actually deleted once you have fulfilled the purposes. But here in the block, the data will stay potentially for an undetermined amount of time, conflicting with this principle. Integrity and confidentiality, very important. Before using the blockchain, then you should also evaluate what is the robustness of this mechanism, of this technology, of this means. How the data will be protected inside the blockchain. And therefore, you need to do a risk evaluation on the data that you want to upload on the blockchain itself. So a risk evaluation before getting into blockchain personal data. Last, accountability. You know, you need to do something according to the GDPR and prove what you have done. Blockchain could be interesting because if you manage to collect proof of any transaction meaning also the processing of personal data and how you process them, well, actually, blockchain could be a very good means in order to fulfill the principle of accountability, leaving a modifiable evidence of what you have done in terms also of compliance with privacy and data protection. Data protection by design and fairness by design. And here I want to broaden the scope a bit of the presentation. So you all know, at least you have heard about the principle of data protection by design. I always say this is not a principle, it's a means. So you want to use data protection by design in order to make sure that the data processing activities complies with the principle of Article 5, the one that we have just seen, transparency, lawfulness, minimization, and so on and so forth. But if this is a means and it is not a principle, then the blockchain could also be seen as a means to achieve data protection by design in any data processing that you are putting in place. So what you need to do in order to make sure that by using blockchain, you are also aligned with the main principles that we have seen before, and you do it by way of data protection by design, you need to do a data protection impact assessment. So before using that technology, from the compliance point of view, and also to make it effective for the data subject in terms of protection, you need to analyze that data processing, you need to analyze that technology, and only when you have done so, you are ready to take a decision. Yes, we use it. No, we don't use it. Or we use it, but instead of placing the data inside the blockchain, we will put it outside the blockchain with the pointers, with the hash pointers, as I mentioned before. This is very important. Concept of fairness by design. It's a specification of the concept of data protection by design. It was very interesting in the presentation before. The speaker was saying, we need to understand, we need to decide how we want that artificial intelligence will be used. Okay, so technology per se can also be seen as neutral, okay? But then the way you use it can make it lawful or unlawful. And when you think about all the application of artificial intelligence and also all the application of blockchain, you can think about good use, lawful use, and unlawful uses. So when you think about the concept of fairness by design, it's about not just complying with the law. It's about making sure that when you deploy that means blockchain, you do it in a right way, in a way that will not hamper the data subjects. Let's make an example of what could be seen as fair use of data in a blockchain, a real application of it. So let's say that how blockchain can help achieving this concept of fairness by design. So let's say I'm a user, I want to use an application, a service provided by an application, and in order to be able to use that service, I need to provide personal data to the owner of the application. So I can provide my data to that owner of the application, and then the next application I want to use, I need to provide the same data or even more to another one, and then to another one, and then to another one. So I can immediately say that I'm not in control of my personal data. The concept of data protection by design is about having the user in control of the personal data. Fairness by design is even more. You need to be in control and decide how to use the personal data. So let's say that I will negotiate, of course, automatically with the application owner and say, which kind of data do you need? This data set, perfect. I don't give it to you directly. I upload it in a blockchain. And I decide by way of a smart contract, which is nothing more than a code saying how you access and use my data, and I give you the permission that are strictly related to the service that you want to provide me. So do you need to have the IP address? Perfect. I will say in the blockchain that IP address can be used by that service provider. Do you need my name and surname? Perfect. You can do that. But maybe you don't need to have other information that are not necessary to provide me your service. So I create an identity attribute, I put it in a blockchain, I give rules through ways of smart contracts to make sure that those data can be vehicled and accessible and usable by third party providing the service, and I can actually use that attributes for multiple service providers instead of giving the data to all service providers. So I will have a centralized management, pretty safe, in the blockchain, and service provider will use those attributes in order to provide me the service. Multiple parties will access one single identity point according to the rules that I have written, that I have negotiated, of course, automatically. So in that respect, this could be a fair use of this technology, improving the position of the data subject, giving more power, more self-determination, and control. So in terms of conclusions about that, we see definitely that as artificial intelligence, but even as big data and analytics, also blockchain poses quite a number of challenges in terms of privacy and data protection. Some of them seems to be very hard to solve, data minimization, the fact that you should delete personal data, after you have fulfilled the scope of your data processing. But probably by thinking about mechanism where you put the data outside the blockchain, or using smart contracts in order to regulate what to do with the data inside the blockchain, writing the rules for the usage, that could be a way that will, on the one side, keep preserving privacy, and on the other side, having this technology proliferate. So just to conclude, one of the research stream that I'm also involved at Maastricht University is really about how contracts are actually influencing privacy and data protection, another domain of laws. And it seems to me that in a society, in an economy, where multiple parties are almost always providing services that are also similar and interconnected, think about Internet of Things as well, well, actually, contracts between parties, and therefore smart contracts, can really play a role also for the benefit of other domains of law, including especially privacy and data protection, as we have talked about in this presentation. Thank you very much, and any questions?
Paolo, thank you so much for your presentation. And I must give you a compliment. It's not easy to bring legal aspects in a very provocative and good way in a presentation. So well done, you.
Thank you.
Dear audience, is there a question from your side? Because then we'll be happy to take that one. If not, I'd like to wrap it up with one final question for you. Would you in the end say that if the GDPR would not have been there, that at least from the blockchain perspective, you would have had so much more opportunities and leeway?
The easy answer is yes, but this is not the answer that we want, because maybe I want to share just one final remark, which I think is good also to make you think about that. The GDPR has tried to regulate to the very best for Europe after a very, very difficult debate between stakeholders last many years. One of the most sensitive area in the world, managing information, personal data. Of course, the GDPR is not the silver bullet for everything, cannot be fully comprehensive. One thing that I cannot stand, and I'll try to be very provocative, and I would like you to join me demanding that at the national level, at the European level. I cannot stand the fact that after 1 year of the GDPR, there are no clear indication on how this legislation should apply to artificial intelligence, how this legislation will apply to reuse of personal data, to analytics, to big data, to blockchain. We cannot wait anymore. I have witnessed the legislative process for so many years, and finally we got the law. But we cannot stop there. We need to help the business, but also the society, the data subject, understanding their rights, the burdens, the duties, the obligations. We cannot remain silent. And therefore, this is an open call to push authorities in order to grant, to publish clarification. We really need it, not just for business, not just for money, but also for the benefit of the digital society.
Exactly, because otherwise we'll be missing out on some brilliant opportunities.
For sure.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a final big hand to Paolo.
Thank you very much. Thank you.